Tanick has spoken here so many times. He hardly needs to be introduced. I think everybody here knows him. However, I'll give you a brief summary. He's a longtime resident of Golden Valley. How long have you lived in Golden Valley?
42 years.
Oh, wow.
Okay, that is long. You beat you though, 50. He ran his own firm for 35 of those years, and he's currently with the law firm of Meyer Njus Tanick. Marshall is also a prolific writer and a frequent contributor to the North Star Tribune opinion page. We've probably seen something by him either there or in the Sun Post, where he has frequently contributed. He usually talks about some aspect of the law, and today's presentation is an interesting variation on that. It's titled Dylan's Lyrics and the Law. So thank you very much, Marshall. I can't wait to hear you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me back, and I can't wait to hear myself either. Because I've been asked to give this presentation. Am I okay?
Sorry, I left my glasses.
Oh, I've been asked to give this presentation, or I've been offered to give this presentation a couple of years. So I'm giving this presentation. If you missed this or want to hear it again, a little bit different format. June 10th to the Ramsey County Bar Association, and that's a little bit different presentation. It's not to be a little bit more legalistic, but if you go online, Ramsey County Bar, the Ramsey County Law Library, CLEs, because lawyers who attend these get continuing legal education grants, but this program is going to be presented in a little bit longer fashion, a little bit different fashion. On June 10th, you can find it on the online Ramsey County Law Library. And I'm also giving this presentation to another group later in June, so this could be a little bit different format. But so you folks are the guinea pigs for this. I can't think of a better group to be guinea pigs than you guys. At any rate, excuse me. As most of you know, this Sunday is Bob Dylan's 85th birthday. Probably didn't know that, okay? I didn't know that either until I was just scanning around one day and said, oh, Bob Dylan, 85 years old. I wonder if there's a legal connection, and there is. You're going to hear it. Incidentally, I passed out an article I wrote a couple of years ago that kind of on the same topic. So this presentation, and I'm going to keep it kind of short, is derived from that article. You can take it home, and I'll even autograph it if you want, okay? All right, so we're here to talk about Bob Dylan's lyrics and the law, but we're talking about more than just Dylan, as you'll see in a few moments if I get to it. So this is what we're going to talk about. We're talking about Dylan, winning words. We're going to talk about, but it's not just about Dylan. We're going to also get our Rolling Stones in here. We're going to get the Beatles in here too. Yes. Okay? Because the basic concept of this is the use of courts to reference lyrics from songs. Okay? You know, if I had more time, I could have done more. I could have done Sinatra and everybody else, but it's kind of amazing how often, relatively speaking, courts, judicial decisions, cite music as a basis or a reason, a rationale for a decision. And you're going to see it here, not just from Dylan, but others as well. It's interesting to lawyers to see that because we cite Dylan and other musicians in legal decisions, and in briefs, I often try to cite, in my briefs, I always cite something that from either a musician or somebody else. I use Yogi Berra quotes or something like that. I try to kind of broaden it out to make it a little bit more interesting for the judges if nobody else. Okay? So, Dylan, a little bit of that on Dylan. Most of you know this. Dylan was born on May 24th, 1941. He was named Robert Allen Zimmerman. He wasn't born in Hibbing. A lot of people say, he was born in Hibbing. Well, he was born in Duluth, in the hospital, but his parents and his family lived in Hibbing. And he was raised in Hibbing. I always ask this, people, any Iron Rangers here, or relatives, or anybody from the Iron Range, or relatives? But this, he went to Hibbing High School. And I don't know if you've ever been to Hibbing High School, probably haven't, but it has an auditorium. It was built in 1921 by the taconite industry. They put a lot of money in it. They have a world-class auditorium there. The auditorium is gold embossed and looks like Donald Trump designed it because there's a lot of gold in there. But
First public school to have a swimming pool.
Yeah, was it? Okay, I didn't know that either. Okay, good point. I'll
In
bring that
Minnesota
up.
or in the country?
Minnesota for sure.
Yeah, probably. Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, good point, Mark. Thank you. At any rate, the auditorium there is world class. It's a miniature version of a Radio City Music Hall. If you've ever been there, I mean, it's just a world-class auditorium, and a swimming pool too, I guess. But that's Hibbing High School. He went to the University of Minnesota after graduating from high school, dropped out after 1 year. He was married twice, has 6 children. Some of you probably saw the movie A Complete Unknown a couple years ago. Did you see that with Timothy Chalamet? And that was a Dylan story. And as you recall from the movie, which was fairly accurate, Dylan went to New York after leaving here and kind of bummed around there, but hung around the music halls and the cafes, but he was a nobody, a complete unknown. He made his breakthrough with some of his record recordings and albums in '64 and '65. So there was a little bit of a gap, but he was still fairly young. He was only 23, 24 years old when he finally made his breakthrough and became on the national scene at about that time period, early 60s. There have been several movies made about him. One of them was done about 20 years ago. I'm Not Here. I find that interesting because in this movie, there were 6 or 7 famous actors who each played different Dylans in portions of his life. And it was about Dylan, but it wasn't a documentary, it was a movie with actors playing different Dylan roles, and Cate Blanchett probably was the most outstanding one. She played Dylan, in his teenage years, and Timothy Chalamet, of course, starred in the Complete Unknown, which received a number of Academy Award nominations a few years ago. Dylan has been cited in legal decisions more than 200 times. He leads the league in that respect. Dylan, when I got into this, I thought, well, the Beatles probably are cited the most. They're not. Dylan has been cited in legal cases, reported cases, there are probably a lot of them that we don't know about, more than 200 times, twice as often as the Beatles. Beatles are in there about 120 times, different legal cases referring to Beatles songs, citing Beatles songs, reciting Beatles songs. Dylan, though, is the league leader. He's twice as many as Beatles. The other runners-up are the Rolling Stones, Bruce Springsteen, Woody Guthrie, and Simon and Garfunkel. They're way below. In fact, Dylan has been cited by judges in court decisions as many times as all of these others combined. So Dylan leads the league in that. Okay? So let's start in with a few of these decisions. I'm not going to have time to cover all of them, but these are some cases, real-life cases, in which judges and courts have relied upon or referred to Dylan lyrics as a basis or rationale or reason or explanation for their particular decision. Start right at the top with Chief Justice John Roberts. Okay, this was a mundane debt collection case. It was somehow got before the Supreme Court. As you know, the Supreme Court hears very few cases. 1% of all cases get to the Supreme Court. Not 1%, but 8,000 petitions are filed with the Supreme Court every year. They hear 60 cases a year. So your chance of having a case before the Supreme Court is less than 1% of the 1% of cases that are filed before the Supreme Court. So do the math with me. It's 1% of 1%. Okay? But they hear some cases. This happened to be a mundane debt collection case of no great significance, but somehow the Supreme Court took the case. But Justice Roberts, and they ruled in favor of the debt collector, but the company seeking to collect the debt, Sprint, was suing another company for on a business debt, but they had received the assignment of the debt from another company, and there was a real question as to whether they had the right to sue, whether they had standing to pursue the case or not. Again, a pretty mundane legal issue. But Roberts said he didn't think the case should even been heard. He dissented and said we shouldn't even hear this case because these folks have no standing. They received an assignment of a debt from somebody else. Okay? And then he quoted Dylan. He said, when you got nothing you want, you got nothing to lose. And that's a quotation from the Dylan song, Rolling Stone. What just Roberts was referring to, he said, we can't let just anybody come in here and sue. You have to have legal standing. You have the right to sue. We're just too lax in this case in allowing a company that bought someone else's debt to sue. And he referred to Dylan's song for that reason. When you got nothing that you want, you got nothing to lose. He said, we're letting too many people pursue these lawsuits that we shouldn't do it. So that's a Dylan quote done by the Supreme Court. Another Dylan quote is from Antonin Scalia. Many of you know of him. He was the most conservative judge on the court. He was the leading conservative voice on the court for many years, for about 25 years. And he was known for being a great opera fan, as some of you may know. Scalia was a great fan of the opera. He was on the conservative wing of the court. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was on the liberal wing of the court. They didn't agree about much of anything. One thing they did agree on, they were both big opera fans, and they'd go to operas together. And that's about the only time they would not be arguing about cases. But So Scalia was an opera guy, but he got into a Dillon citation in this case. It was called Quant versus City of Ontario many years ago. The case involved whether the City of Ontario, California, was requiring police officers to carry electronic pager devices with them at all times. Not a big deal, but the officers' union objected. They said we shouldn't be required to have pagers when we're off duty. The city said, well, you're never off duty if you're a cop. The emergency said, we want you to have these pager devices with you all the time. So it was a labor dispute, a labor management dispute over whether a city can require police officers to have pagers on them at all times. Right? Important issue from a labor law standpoint of what are the authority of cities to require unions to abide by city policies and so on and so forth. Well, the court decided the case in favor of the city. They said the city has the right to make these cops have the pagers. But that's not what Scalia got into. Scalia wrote a dissent, and he said we shouldn't. The labor management issue is kind of interesting, Scalia said, but it's not really the core of this. What we should be focusing on is the use of technology devices in general, and we should have. And he criticized the court for not writing a broader decision about the use of technology in the workplace in general. A little bit early for its time, 15 years ago. Now it's a pervasive issue, but back then it was kind of a cutting-edge issue. Scalia said we ought to take up that issue of the use of technology across the board in workplaces and come up with some guidelines and standards that are broader than just this simple one city case. And to do that, he quoted Dillon's song, "The times they are a-changing." He wrote the lyrics of the Dillon, part of the Dillon song. He said the times are a-changing. What he was referring to is we got to get with it here in the court. We got to get more technologically adept. We have to deal with these technological issues in modern times because the times they are changing, quoting Dillon's song. Okay? A few more Dillon cases here, and this is a famous quote from a Dillon song. This case involved a dispute between the Los Angeles School District and the Supreme Court in California, not the United States Supreme Court. There was a dispute about some court rulings that affected the Los Angeles School District in terms of their bonding and funding ability to issue bonds for the Los Angeles School District. The court had ruled they must do so, and the school district was suing the court. So that was the background of this case. But the school district was argued that they needed some expert witnesses in this case to determine what kind of bonds should be issued and whether the school district has the authority to issue school bonds, public funding bonds. Okay, that was the issue. The school district said, we need some expert witnesses to decide this case for us. We can't have judges and juries decide these cases. Well, the court said, no, there's no need for expert witnesses. They said, this is kind of a simple case, simple in the sense that you can just apply the law here and determine whether these bonds are properly issued or not. We don't need a lot of experts to come in and talk about school funding and bonding. It's a simple issue. So the court said. And the court said, we can have juries decide simple cases. We don't need expert witnesses in this kind of case because, quoting Dillon, you don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows. That's a very famous quote from a Dillon case, and the court was using that to point out we got too many experts in these cases, and too many cases are pervaded or invaded by experts. And they didn't say you can never use experts. They're saying in some cases, just look at the law, let the judges and jury decide without all these experts telling us how to decide cases. That became a slogan for a bunch of the protest movements of the 60s and 70s, and still is around today. You don't need a weatherman to know which way the weather is blowing, which way the wind is blowing. That's a Dillon song. It gets quoted in a lot of cases. And I've cited a couple of them here. Another one, this is a case out of Washington State, which involved the question of whether employers have to include contraceptives, birth control, and employers' health insurance plans, okay? So that was the issue in the case. But the court, and again, there was one of the parties said, we want to bring in expert witnesses about the use of birth control pills and whether it's important and whether there ought to be any insurance plans. And the court used the same phrase. The judge in that case said, we don't need experts to decide this issue. Either they can do it or they can't do it because you don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows. So it's a phrase that courts use occasionally. Say, don't confuse us with a lot of the experts and stuff. We can make the decision ourselves or let judges and juries because you don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind is blowing. Another use of the Dillon phrase, which is a contemporary case, although it was decided 11 years ago, this was a case of an indefinite detention of an undocumented immigrant. We've seen that before, haven't we, recently, okay? But back in the day, there were some cases, not many, in which undocumented immigrants were placed, in this case, in indefinite detention. There was an undocumented immigrant. The immigration authorities placed him in indefinite detention. That means they kept him in jail forever. And he wanted a hearing and a right to challenge his detention. That was the issue in this case. It's the kind of issue we're hearing about and seeing more frequently, obviously, with what's been going on lately. In that case, though, the court ruled that he's entitled, that an undocumented immigrant is entitled to have a hearing and a right to have a trial. You can't just put someone in indefinite detention simply because they're an undocumented immigrant without having a trial to determine his rights and so on and so forth. What we're seeing nowadays is that, and I'm not going to get into the politics of it, just the fact, the current administration is, with undocumented immigrants, is in many instances just taking them without hearings and shipped them to other countries. There have been 300 instances that we know about, and more that we don't know about probably, in which the undocumented immigrants from basically Latin American countries, mainly Mexico and Guatemala, have been apprehended and then sent out of the country. And where have they been sent to? Africa. They've been dumped in Africa there without any hearings. And that's been contested and it's still going through the court system. But meanwhile, this is an example of that more than a decade ago. And the court there used Dylan phrases from his 1964 song called Chamber of Freedom. And the court said you can't treat these undocumented immigrants like the luckless, the abandoned, and the forsaken. Those are words taken from a Dylan song, and the court used those words to say that immigrants have to be given at least a right to a hearing and a trial before you have indefinite detention. I don't know if that phrase has been used lately in some of these cases, but maybe it ought to be thought about. Oops, where am I here? Oops, I jumped ahead too much here. Uh-oh. Oh, I knew this was going to happen here. Oh, I jumped ahead here. Brian, do you want to help me for a minute? Darn, I touched the wrong button here. I'm sorry, folks. I locked into the wrong button. Darn.
So
Let's go back a little bit. Oh, no.
it's just minimized on the.
We'll get it. I'm sorry. I don't do tech well. Shoot. Well, I'll just continue.
Is the cursor showing on your screen, Brian?
How come it's not going there?
It's on the screen.
Yeah, I don't know what they did to fix it before.
Okay.
Maybe it was just frozen.
All right. Well, get your articles out. We'll go through the articles and we'll do the rest of this off the articles. Sorry about that. We're just getting to the good part with the Rolling Stones.
Oh, about the Doobie Brothers.
Yeah. Madness me with different technology. All right, folks, let's turn the page. Let's see what we got here. I'm going to take one of your articles here. I'll get a different version.
Oh, we got it.
No, gotta go backwards.
Well, we got it up on the screen.
Yeah, got it. All right, well, we'll just, yeah, there you go, backwards. Okay, that's where we were. No, but, no, yeah, that's it.
You're gonna have to come back. You're gonna have to come back and drive.
Yeah,
Those
okay.
left and
You
right
have to
arrows.
stay here with me, Brian. I'm not gonna touch this. Where'd you touch here? 'Cause I-
Just do the left and right arrows.
Left and right, okay. All right, more Dylan stuff. This is a case, this case here is when the question was whether to follow precedent. As you know, legal lawyers always follow precedent. Prior cases, you just cite these prior cases. And the law revolves around precedent. Precedent gives you stability and certainty in court cases and the like. Oh, here comes someone.
This computer?
Keep going, Marshall.
Yeah, anyway, precedent is the controlling factor in legal cases. Judges and lawyers look at previous cases' precedent. This case questioned, why do we use precedent in court cases? Should we depart from precedent? Occasionally, as you know, courts do depart from precedent. They don't always follow the precedent. In fact, many people criticize the court. The most famous example more recently was the Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization case 2022, in which the court reversed the precedent of Roe versus Wade in terms of a right to abortion. The famous Brown versus Board of Education case, which precluded racial segregation in schools, was a reversal, as many of you know, of the precedent of Plessy versus Ferguson, which was decided in 1896, which the Supreme Court said, separate but equal is fine. As long as the facilities are equal, you can have blacks and whites separately. That was the beginning of the Jim Crow era. The court reversed that, of course, in Brown versus Board of Education. So courts do depart from precedent, but not very often. Precedent's a driving force. And why is precedent a driving force? Well, the court explained it in this case. Because gonna have to serve somebody sometime. That's a Dylan phrase from his song, Gotta Be a Troubadour in 1979. What the court did is use the Dylan phrase to indicate why precedent is followed, because you gotta have to serve somebody. Everybody serves somebody else, and they were saying, in the legal system, we can't make up our own decisions on a freewheeling basis. We have to rely on decisions made by other judges, and that forms the basis for precedent. But they used the Dylan phrase to illustrate that point. This is another case in which the courts referred to Dylan's song, It Ain't Me, Babe. This was an individual who was objecting to being told to have his vehicle assessed a toll charge for going over one of the bridges in the toll bridge in New York City. He said, I wasn't even driving my car. Someone else was driving my car, and I ended up getting a bill from the tolling authorities for someone using the toll. Even though I wasn't driving the car, someone else was driving my car. And the court said, well, if you're driving the car, if it's your car and it goes over there, you're responsible for it. And they cited Dylan's song, It Ain't Me, Babe. They're saying that you can't come into court and say it wasn't you driving. It doesn't matter as long as it was your car that crossed the bridge. And they quoted the song from Dylan, It Ain't Me, Babe, meaning you can't get around, you can't avoid responsibility by pointing to someone else's wrongdoing. So seeing these Dylan songs, I figured there must be a number of Dylan songs in Minnesota. As I said, more than 200 cases involving Dylan songs. So I started checking the Minnesota cases, and here's how many Dylan cases I found in Minnesota. 0. Okay? So that's the Minnesota Supreme Court, and that's the Minnesota Supreme Court Justice, and that's Minnesota. Hitting up there, right? But no Dylan cases yet decided by Minnesota courts. Let's go on to a couple other musical bands. This is the Rolling Stones have been cited often as well. This is a case in which a number of debt collection cases, these debt collection lawsuits were all grouped together in front of one particular judge. Yeah, as a class action with all kinds of debt collection cases, unlawful practices and debt collection, fairly common type of case. And the judge in his decision said, all these cases should not be grouped together. It's just too hard to sort out these various different cases. They all have to be brought separately rather than just lumping all these cases together. And he said in his decision, lumping these cases together is like giving me a 19th nervous breakdown. And he said, in these cases, anybody to decide these cases, he said, I need Mother's Little Helper, Rolling Stone citation. People look at what case did that come from? Well, it comes from the Rolling Stone song, okay? Another Rolling Stone song with a little bit of a Minnesota backstory, which many of you heard before. This was a case in Kansas that involved a convoluted workers' compensation dispute. I won't get into it because I don't have an hour to describe the complexity of the case. But an employee was injured in a job, he gets workers' compensation, but then he sued his employer and he sued another party that caused the injury, and it became a big, messy workers' compensation case. Not unusual for lawyers, we see those kind of cases from time to time, but it was a convoluted mess, and the employee that was injured was seeking all different remedies. He was seeking to recover from the employer for his workers' compensation injury. He was seeking to recover from the other party who had caused his injury. He also had a suit against the machine company, the company that made the machine where he was injured. So he had about four different claims going and was seeking different remedies from all these different folks. And the court said, well, you can't have all these claims going at the same time. If you're injured at work, fine, we'll figure that out. But you can't be suing 4 different people over the same injury. You can't have all these alternative remedies because, as the court said, you can't always get what you want. That's from the Rolling Stones song, and that has a Minnesota story, which I will now recount. Some of you may have heard this before, and if you were at the 2019 Rolling Stone concert here, which is at the University of Minnesota, what's the name of the stadium there?
TCF Bank.
It used to be TCF Bank. They named it, I can't think, Huntington Bank Stadium, right? Yeah. But it was at the TCF Bank, the University of Minnesota football stadium. The Rolling Stones, they've been here 7 times performing. They've been here since then, I think, at least once or twice. But I was at the 2019 concert at TCF Bank, the Rolling Stones. It was 50,000 people, so it was a noisy concert. But anyway, not one of many concerts. But Mick Jagger told this story. He says, it's great to be back in Minnesota. He didn't tell the whole story, but he referenced the story I'm going to tell you. It's about this song. Okay? In 1962, the Stones were a nobody band, okay? To show you how low level they were playing a gig, a weekend gig at Excelsior Amusement Park. Okay? Which wasn't a bad place, but they weren't exactly filling up a stadium, okay? This is 62. They were preceding the Beatles. Remember, the Beatles didn't make it big until 64, 65. So in 62, the Beatles were still performing at beer halls in Germany. The Rolling Stones were touring here in the United States, but no one ever heard of them, or hardly anyone did. So they're playing, they have a weekend gig at the old Excelsior Amusement Park. Same group. These guys, it was the same group. And Keith Richards was ill again, or first time maybe, okay? So they went into a local pharmacy on Main Street in Excelsior. The building is still there, right on that Main Street in Excelsior there, right by the dock there. And they were looking for a particular pharmaceutical device, not device, pharmacy. They gave them the name of the pharmacy. They gave the pharmacist, and I have these kind of pills, it's for my sinus, he has sinus condition. And it was and he had that prescription from a British doctor. The pharmacist said, oh, I can't fiddle that. I mean, we don't have that here. This is Excelsior. We don't have British medicine here. So the pharmacist gave Richard some other medication. Said, here, use this for your sinus. We use it here in Minnesota. And Richard used it, and I don't know, I guess the medication cleared up the sinus or whatever because they were able to perform. But the pharmacist told Richard, when he gave him that prescription, the pharmacist said, you can't always get what you want. You should be satisfied with what you get. The pharmacist told Richards that.
No, you got that story way wrong.
Well, that's my side of the story. Mark, you tell the story now.
The story is that, in fact, I knew the guy because he was in the rest home with my grandmother out there.
Okay, you tell the rest of the story.
There's a guy, there's a village idiot in Excelsior. His name is Jimmy Hootmacher.
Okay.
Jimmy Hootmacher was outside, and he told Mick Jagger when he came on site, they were complaining. He says, "You can't always get what you want."
Okay, well, that was close.
You were close.
I'm glad I came. I said you guys
Jimmy
are guinea
Hootmacher
pigs.
is his name, and
All right,
he was in the rest home with my grandmother.
Well, I'm gonna accept that. I'm not gonna challenge that, because if you got his name, you probably got it right. Okay, I was
Yeah,
close.
no, I got it right.
So I said you folks are the guinea pigs, so I'm gonna incorporate that.
And
Go
then
on, if you
and
go to
then-
my next presentation online, you'll see that that's gonna be in there.
Yep.
Jimmy.
When was the song written?
Do we know when the
Oh,
actual song?
afterwards.
Yeah,
Okay.
afterwards. It was great afterwards. But so anyway, the story is, and that comes from a phrase given to Mick Jagger at outside the pharmacy in Excelsior. Okay, so there is a Minnesota connection there after all. Thank you for these are urban war stories. Beatles, okay, lots of Beatles ones. Beatles are second to Dylan. Couple of Beatles ones here that are worth just noting here. Justice Samuel Alito, he's on the Supreme Court now, but he was a circuit judge back in the day, and he had a case involving a trademark dispute between a disbanded band. It was not the Beatles. By this time, the Beatles were long since disbanded. But the question was, who gets to own the name of the band? And it's not that uncommon when these bands just disband. The name has some value, a lot of value, depending upon the quality of the band. There's some states, California, for instance, has a law that if you designate yourself as a particular band, you got to have at least 2 members from the original band. I went a few years ago to a Beach Boys concert, and it was the Beach Boys, but they had one original Beach Boy, and the cousin of one of the music mix people from the original band. But they could call themselves the Beach Boys. Under California law, you have to have 2 there, okay? I mean, then the mamas and the papas, when they had we had one mama and one nephew of a papa there. So but the point is, when the names of the bands are important in certain situations. And this case had an issue. It was not the Beatles, but the case had when a band breaks up, who gets the name? And the name is trademark, and there's legal protection. And in this case, Justice Alito referred to the Beatles. He said when the Beatles broke up 10 years earlier, I mean, not 10 years earlier, but many years earlier, 30 or 40 years earlier, he said there was a dispute over who gets to use the name Beatles, but it became moot because no one used the name Beatles because they didn't continue to perform that way. And Paul McCartney was just on Saturday Night Live this week, I think, but former Beatle. Okay, you can use that name, former Beatle, but they use the word Beatles. Another kind of contemporary case now is this is a case in Illinois where the city put a monument of the 10 Commandments in a city park, municipal park. That's a hot issue these days. as many of you know, recently Texas and Louisiana both passed laws requiring the 10 Commandments to be posted in all public schools. And it's created a lot of controversy on First Amendment grounds, freedom of religion. There's two sides to the issue, probably three sides to the issue. I'm not going to get into who's right and who's wrong, but the lower courts have upheld that. That case may be headed to the Supreme Court. There's a number of Supreme Court cases that deal with the issue of the 10 Commandments. Is it religious? Is it historical? Is it social? And it's disputed, and this was a version of that dispute. The 10 Commandments were placed in a city park in Illinois. And the case came before Judge Alito as to whether, it became the Supreme Court, just whether it was proper to have the 10 Commandments at a city park, a municipal-owned park. And in his decision upholding that, Justice Alito said, well, there's a lot of monuments and a lot of statutes and a lot of places that are publicly maintained statutes, and he used a reference to John Lennon. There's a statue of John Lennon in Central Park, right near the site where he was murdered, and it has a statue of Lennon with the words and lyrics of his song Imagine. Alito pointed to that as a basis for saying it was proper to have the 10 Commandments in this park because cities have the discretion to put statutes in parks. Right? Some people said, well, yeah, no one's questioning the statutes in parks. They're questioning what kind of statue you're putting there and what kind of message you're giving. But Alito said, if you can put a passage down, if you can have a statue of John Lennon in a public park, why can't you have the 10 Commandments? Is what that was his reasoning in that case. Another kind of interesting Beatles case was a case involving a school in New York that set aside a specific room in the public school for students to go and pray. Okay? And this was public school, but prayer was allowed. There was no teachers in there, no staff, but they were giving students a prayer room in a public school. And the question there was, is that legal or not to have a public school having its facilities used for prayer? And the court said it was not and struck that down, said you can't use a public school for prayer. Okay? That was the reason in the case. However, one of the dissenting judges said, well, you know, the phrase they used in that case was worship rather than prayer. One of the dissenting judges said, well, you know, worship can cover a lot of different grounds, he said. Worship doesn't just have to be religious. And he said, some people worship the Beatles. He said, prayer isn't just for religious purposes. Prayer can be as simple as reverence for the Beatles. He said, if you can revere the Beatles and pray to the Beatles, you should be able to pray in school. That was his reasoning in that. A couple other Beatles cases are here. The courts not often, but occasionally cite the Long Winding Road song from the Beatles when they're dealing with complex cases. This was a complex bankruptcy case in which the court said, this case has been around so long, it's gone through so many different permutations, it's like a long winding road. Another court case dealt with a dispute over automated billboards, and the court said, trying to decipher who's right and who's wrong in these long, protracted litigation cases is like a long and winding road. So those are some examples of, I'm not done yet, but those are some examples of courts using phrases, mainly from Dylan because it's 85th birthday, but the Rolling Stones and Beatles, and I could have pulled out some more as well, indicating that the courts will rely upon popular songs, popular musicians, well-known musicians, as bases for their decisions, and will look to those songs as forming some kind of rationale for deciding the way they do. So that's kind of a quick overview of Dylan's Law and Lyrics. Now we're ready for our quiz, okay? Ready, everyone? Let's start with number one. How much do you know about Dylan? Dylan, as I said, was 1 year attended the University of Minnesota. Attended probably is the wrong word. Enrolled, let's put it that way. Okay? Where did he perform around the campus? Anyone want to guess?
Looking to you, Mark.
Pardon?
Looking to you to know the answer.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of it. It's on the corner of Cedar and on Seven Corners.
Theater around and.
Yeah, that's where it was. Yeah, it's a 10 O'Clock Scholar was the name of the building, okay? The 10 O'Clock Scholar was where he performed. All right, the Dylan movie a couple years ago, Complete Unknown, starred Timothy Chalamet. He played the Dylan character in A Complete Unknown. He also was in last year's movie, which got some Academy Award attention, although no awards, playing Marty Supreme. Anyone see Marty Supreme? Well, then you know the answer is, what character did he played Dylan in the Dylan movie, but this is the Marty Supreme movie last year, Academy Award nominee, didn't win any. What role did he play there? Don't tell us, Brian, let someone guess. I don't want someone who knows the answer, that's no fun.
C.
Yeah, C is the answer. It's a ping pong movie. A very good movie, incidentally. One of Dylan's early mentors was whom?
What do you got?
Obviously. Wrong. It's Pete Seeger.
Oh,
Yeah.
Guthrie was long since dead by that time. Pete Seeger was his mentor.
That's right, yeah.
Dylan's parents. Well, now we're back to Hibbing. With we talked about Hibbing. Yeah, we talked about the auditorium and the radio station. All right, that's downtown Hibbing. Back in the that's not back in the 50s, 60s. Yeah, 60s. Dylan was born in Duluth, raised in Hibbing, and what did his parents do?
D.
Yeah, it was an appliance and hardware store. It was their version of the Mall of America. One store, you buy everything in one store in Hibbing, right? Okay. There was Hibbing, Dylan, as you know, maybe don't know, was Jewish. His parents were Jewish. There was a not thriving, but a small but long-standing Jewish population up on the range. There was a synagogue in Hibbing. It's long since gone defunct. But in Dylan's era, he was bar mitzvah. He had a bar mitzvah at the synagogue in Hibbing. There was a Jewish community, small one, in the range, and Hibbing was the center of it. And there was a synagogue in Hibbing. And his parents were Jewish. Okay, one of these four isn't from Hibbing. All right, singer Gary Puckett, the Union Group. Basketball, Kevin McHale. Charles Manson, prosecutor, Vincent McGill. You know who that is? I mean, you know what I'm referring to? The prosecutor of Charles Manson was Vincent Bugliosi. He wrote a number of books and was a commentator and all that. And hockey is Lou Nanny. One of these people was not from Hibbing. Which one? Yeah, of course. Lou Nanny. He was from Sault Ste. Marie in Canada. Gary Puckett of the Union Gap. It should be Union Gap, not Union Group. He was from Hibbing. Fairly popular group in its day, right? They had a couple of hits, didn't they, Mark? You know. Basketball's Kevin McHale. Hibbing. McHale said I was the only kid growing up who didn't play hockey. Hibbing. Charles Manson, the Vincent Bugliosi prosecutor, was born and raised in Hibbing. He won the 1951 Minnesota State High School Tennis Championship. And that was when they had one class. There wasn't these 6 classes where you never knew who was playing in what class. There was one class back then. And he was the top high school tennis player in Minnesota. He got a tennis scholarship to UCLA. That's how he ended up in California and went to UCLA and law school there. And lastly, Dylan won the Nobel Prize in 2016, which is the right answer. What did he do when he won the Nobel Prize?
D.
Pardon?
D.
Yeah, he didn't show up. And I did show up, and I hope you enjoyed this and had some fun.